Oh, g'day champions. We've got a Garrison here with a lot of issues. The main one being the lacquer peeling off the neck. Now, I've discussed this before on my channel. It happens quite a lot. These aren't the most common guitars out here, but I've seen a lot of these. It's almost like they applied the sealer coat and then tried to apply the top coat on top without sanding it. Now you can do that if you spray it before the base coat's cured. Of course you kind of don't want to, because when you apply the base coat the grain on the timber lifts up, and you need to sort of smooth that off again, otherwise it's a very rough coat to spray over. Now I'm not sure why this happens, or if anyone watching this can offer any more information, but they all seem to do it. It's clearly a problem in the factory. You can't see any sanding marks there on the primer coat, and sections that I've freshly peeled off, it looks the same underneath. So I don't know that it's the paint being defective. I think it's a technique issue. So what I might do is I'll remove the hardware and use compressed air to blast off the remainder, and any parts that are a bit too stubborn to come off, we'll get the scraper out and scrape them off before sanding and prepping for a top coat. Now, looking closely at that finish, I know Panny Boy's pulsing focus is a bit distracting, but even the base coat, whatever sealer that is, has like checking, crazing in it. So I'm starting to think on this particular one we might have to take it all the way back to timber. I've had other ones where I've got away with just doing the top coat, but I've had other ones like this where that hasn't worked. We've had to go all the way back to the timber, so I think that's the case here, and then we'll seal it with polyurethane and a satin top coat. However, that's not all that's wrong with it. This has also got a pretty significant crack in the soundboard there and some separation from the side, so we'll have to sort of spread that out again, get the timber fibres back home where we can, and do some cleats inside and then some finish touch up. I've told them it won't be invisible. You'll still be able to see it, but we'll try and make it as discreet as possible. Besides that, we've got pretty high action. It's up around, say, 3.5 mil at 12th fret. Pretty corroded frets. Not too worn. So we might be able to just remove that corrosion and give them a bit of a polish, and they'll probably come up pretty well. So the lacquer on the headstock face looks okay, so they must have used a different preparation method for that. So luckily we don't lose the logo or anything on the front face. We can actually just mask that off and leave it as is. So let's remove these strings and hardware and get to work. Now, I like to relieve a bit of tension on the strings before cutting them, so it doesn't go twang, fly off and take out my freaking eye. My freaking eyeballs. Take the saddle out so we don't lose it on the floor. Now I might just remove this nut just to make masking a bit easier. $10mm tube socket. Now these are the tuning machines with a little dowel cast into them, so there's no screw on the back. You can see it's taking the lacquer with it. Alright, so I've already removed a lot of it just by hand, just peeled off in my hand. Any bits where it's still stuck, we'll just try some compressed air to get under it. With safety glasses on, of course, because the stuff goes flying. Yeah, you can see here where no attempt has been made to sand that stuff at all. In fact, it almost looks like it's got brush strokes in it, like the primer was brushed on. So yeah, it looks like definitely a technique issue as opposed to the paint itself failing. Alright, so let's get this thing masked up and start working on prepping it all. So most of you guys in Canada and the States probably are aware of the gimmick on this model. It's got like a fiberglass, a blurry fiberglass bracing system. It's like a skeleton on the front and back, molded. Well, it's not really fiberglass, it's glass reinforced plastic. So it was a great gimmick, but no one's really carried on with it anymore, I don't think. Everyone's gone back to timber. This thing actually sounds really nice. It's got a lot of bass, like surprising amount of bass for the size. It is a Dreddy, but I don't think I've ever heard a Dreddy with this much bass, so maybe that is a result of the proprietary bracing method. Alright, so that's the immediate work area that's all masked up. Obviously when we spray paint it, we're going to mask the body up as well. I usually just throw a big garbage bag around the whole thing and then tape it off around the perimeter, instead of stuffing around, putting an individual piece of paper and stuff on it. Just bag her up, buddy. So now it's time for Scrapey Scraperson. Now I'm assuming most of you guys know what a cabinet scraper is. It's a piece of high speed steel, like high carbon steel, with a ground edge perfectly square to the other two faces at a right angle, like to what 800 grit, whatever my hone is. And then once you've got a perfect corner on there, you run a piece of, I use an old router bit from a CNC machine, a piece of tungsten, and you mushroom over one edge of it, and it creates like a little hook on this side that works like a real fine cutting blade. It can't dig in, it can only go as deep as like the little burries, which is like less than 0.1 of a mil, but it's just enough to actually get under the fibers and lift the timber. When you've got a real sharp one, it actually takes off almost like a tiny little wispy film of timber, particularly when it's in the scraper handle. Speaking of scraper handles, here's my Stanley number 80 cabinet scraper. It's really good for when you've got a really difficult grain on your cabinet or whatever you're scraping. Irregular grains where a planer would dig in and rip out grain. This just takes ever so slightly takes a top layer off it. Fantastic little units these. When processing timber, you know, by the meter, obviously the spiral head thicknesser, which I think I showed on another stream or something. Oh, that would have been the Champ cabinet building video. The spiral head thicknesser makes short work of even the most difficult grain, but when you've got an assembly that you've put together, obviously you can't throw a guitar headstock through the planer thicknesser, so that's when the cabinet scraper comes in handy. Anyway, enough chatting. I smelled, when I was stripping off the top coat, the distinctive smell of polyester, and now that I'm down to the sanding sealer, there's no smell. So I'm wondering if the sanding sealer was like a nitrocellulose type product and the top coat was a polyester. Tell you what, let's find out. So here I've got a bit of acetone on a cotton tip, cotton bud. If this melts the finish and melds together those little cracks, then it's either a nitro or a shellac or something. But it's not even touching it. So yeah, that's some sort of 2-pack sanding sealer as well. Just doesn't have the aromatics in it like the top coat. So by varying my pressure here, I'm not taking any timber off, I'm just taking the finish off the top of the timber. When I feel it starting to bite into the timber, I lay back with the pressure. And it doesn't dig in enough into the fibers to take the timber out. It just fractures away the top, the lacquer, which is what we want. Alright, so that's the headstock done. Just gonna have to rearrange the clamps and stuff to access the heel. Right, now I'll switch over to my curve scraper so I can get into the curve of the heel without going across the grain anyway, because that could give you some tear out. Alright, so there she is scraped. Sorry, forgive me, the afternoon sun is beaming in the workshop here. So not the best environment for photography, but you get the idea. So now we're going to sand that. I'll probably start at 150, maybe 180. Don't want to go too vicious. And get a prep for the sealer coat. Alright, there we have it, champion. She's sanded down to 180. Now what I've got to do is fill the grain. So to do that, we take some wood putty, dilute it down a bit with water, and slather it on. Wipe off the excess, and then give it another sand, probably to 240 this time. Mahogany is a very open grain timber, and you've got to give it a shit ton of sealer coats, sanding in between if you don't fill the grain. The sanding sealer is actually, as its name implies, sandable, whereas the top coat is super hard. You don't want to be sanding a top coat unless you absolutely have to. The sandpaper just sort of glides over it, and it's really difficult to sand. So you basically want to get it to the point where you've got one top coat, and that's it. That's the final coat. Everything under that sanding sealer.